Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. One of my viewers wanted to know how I would fix Marvel and DC comics if I were the editor-in-chief. Now, I am someone who I believe would be qualified to work in the comic book industry as an editor-in-chief because in the past I have gone out here and learned the craft of novel writing, the craft of screenwriting, the craft of comic book writing, and I have written and published over 80 books in my time building the SJS Direct imprint over the last 15 years, and I believe my background in publishing and understanding the business of publishing would possibly have made me a good fit for being an editor-in-chief at Marvel or DC Comics at one time. Now, both of these companies have gone into a major state of decline ever since their peak days in the 1980s, and both of these companies basically went into a major state of decline because of several factors, one of them being that they were basically run by people who had no real publishing experience, and the other was that you had artists and writers who basically created an environment where they wound up forcing out people in editorial who basically had publishing experience. And because the creatives took control of the business, sadly what happened was the business went into a state of decline. Now, when it comes to trying to turn both Marvel and DC comics around, the person who's going to be able to do this is someone who has publishing experience, because the publishing industry is very different than the entertainment business, and that's where everybody in the comic book industry gets it twisted. When it comes to publishing, you have to have a certain procedures done in order to make sure that books all meet a consistent standard, and that's one of the first things that I would want to do if I ever worked at Marvel and DC Comics, is try to re-establish the framework and structures that people like Jim Shooter and Jeanette Kahn established over at Marvel Comics and DC Comics before both were wound up leaving the business. One left in a very professional fashion. Jeanette Kahn, she wound up stepping down from DC Comics, but Jim Shooter was the one who left the comic book industry in an ignominious fashion, and the way Jim Shooter was treated basically started the whole decline of the comic book industry back in 1987. Now, Jim Shooter, basically, when he became the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics in 1987, was dealing with a company that basically where the creatives were like inmates running the asylum, and they created a lot of chaos, and as they created a lot of chaos, books weren't coming out on time. There was no real way to have consistent standards on books, and Shooter came in because he had publishing experience that he learned at the side of DC editor-in-chief Mort Weisinger. As a teenager, he basically learned the craft of the business, and as he learned the overall craft of the publishing business, he basically started setting standards for the business. And if I came in charge of Marvel or DC Comics, the first thing I'm going to do is basically start to, again, establish that framework for standards in the business. And again, establishing a framework for standards in the business, such as the editor-in-chief having the final say over material and the final say over what type of content would be published at the company. Because as the editor-in-chief, I am the person who is overall accountable for everything that comes out, and everything needs to meet that standard that I establish for most of the comics. So I'm going to establish that I am the leader of the company, and I'm going to establish a standard for quality all around. And again, as I establish that standard for quality, I'm going to represent being the eyes and ears of the public, which is the job of the editor-in-chief. And I'm going to establish that as the editor-in-chief, again, all books meet the standard of being a part of the house style. Whether it be Marvel or DC, there will be a house style similar to what I have over at SJS Direct, where all the books that come out of SJS Direct have the same formatting, have the same standard, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. All the books at SJS Direct are all basically looking the same aesthetically. They all have the same formatting as related to fonts. They all have the same standard as related to the overall structures of the books. That's the first standard. The second standard is that the content is basically going to be meeting the standard of a PG-13 code, and again, meeting the standard of a PG-13 code, because my goal as a publisher at Marvel and DC is to make sure that the big two basically are the driving force as related to business, not only at the comic shop, but also as related to other retailers for superhero comics and other forms of comics. And make sure that, again, the standard is PG-13, because I want my products to be accessible for readers of all ages all across the globe. Moreover, I want to establish a standard for making sure that these books are ones that readers and families can feel comfortable about having in their home. This is something that the industry really hasn't paid attention to over the last, I say, about 30 to 35 years, because a lot of artists want to go out here and a lot of writers want to be edgy. However, when I look at Marvel and DC comics, they need to be family-friendly products. And again, the PG-13 standard is about going out here and building and reestablishing the trust with families all across the country, that their kids will not be exposed to antisocial messages and antisocial behaviors. No, what I want people to do is feel comfortable and safe when they pick up a Marvel or a DC comic, the same way readers who pick up SJS Direct books can feel safe about picking up an ISIS book or a Steam book or a John Haynes book, and not have to worry about their kids being exposed to extremely graphic sexual content, extremely graphic violence that shows us mutilations, decapitations, blood and guts, and bodies being cut to pieces. No, I want there to be a line where you're going to see a standard of books that, again, anybody can just go out here and feel comfortable about picking up. Anybody can feel safe about picking up, and most people can go out here and relax when they pick those books up and know, okay, my kids are not going to be exposed to all sorts of debauchery and all sorts of deviancy all around. And I know that I can trust that when I pick up is going to be something that they can go out here and learn good values and learn about good messages about life. That's what I try to put as the standard over at SJS Direct in my publications, and I would establish that PG-13 standard for Marvel and DC comics once more. That's the standard that I would want to put in my books. Again, something that is on the same level as the comics code that was the standard for comics back in the 1980s and from the 1950s, even before that. Again, the comics code was a code that customers could trust. And again, one of the things that I want to do as an editor-in-chief, if I was at those companies, was establish trust with the customer, because the ultimate goal, what I want to do as an editor-in-chief at either company, is again go out here and re-establish the relationship with the customer, which many editors have gone out here and alienated over the last 30 years. So again, my standards are again about establishing that framework as related to creating a structure of standards. Again, standards that will, again, make sure that the books, again, are of a consistent house style and have a consistent standard for content and have a standard, again, that about forming this relationship, because as someone with publishing experience, I understand that the business is sales. And again, with the business being sales, the way you get sales is to create a trust among of the customer, where the customer knows that they are going to get a certain level of quality, that makes them feel comfortable and even builds up their anticipation for picking up the next issue of the next story. That is the foundation that I'm going to have for the overall product. And again, the customer will come first. Again, the customer is the person I want to form a relationship with, the same way I formed a relationship with the customer with SJS Direct. I formed a relationship with many of my customers. Many of my viewers on the channel are many of my readers, and many of those readers who are fathers have no problem picking up my books and sharing them with their children. And that's what I want to do, again, is foster that type of environment, foster an environment where people, again, can feel comfortable while bringing their kids to the content. And again, when it comes to superhero comics, kids should feel safe and parents should feel safe about picking up books and not having to sit there and explain things that they don't feel comfortable about explaining. And again, the PG-13 standard is all about making sure that these books are, again, family friendly. It's going to be good guys versus bad guys and life lessons that basically teach kids how to apply life. And again, some people, they may not like that kind of comic book, but you need that kind of comic book if you want to drive foot traffic to the bookstores, if you want to drive foot traffic to the comic shops, even though there are less than 300 of them. You need to, again, to have content that basically drives the customer, because content is king. And with comics today, the content is so bad that it's not driving people to the store, but driving them away. And what I want to do is turn that around by establishing those standards as not only the core of the company, but part of the core values. Again, at SJS Direct, the core values here are about creating, not about positive stories about the Black experience and showing you a richer picture of Black life, but doing it in a way where the books are accessible to everyone, including people outside of the Black community. And I've managed to reach people all over the world, people in the goth subculture, people in foreign countries, and show them a richer picture of Black life, and even white people and Hispanic people and Asian people all over the world. And again, that's because I make content that basically anyone can relate to and anyone can feel safe about picking up. That's what I wanted to do at Marvel and DC Comics. If I ever got in charge, that's what I wanted to do, was again create that whole PG-13 environment, and again, family-friendly content. Again, a safe space for readers to open up their imaginations and see a fun and fantastic world at both companies. Now, along with those standards, I'm going to do what Jim Shooter did, and again, establishing deadlines for projects turning in, because you need deadlines to be in place if you hope to get work out on time. You need deadlines in place because every other publishing company, whether it be a trade book publisher, whether it be a magazine publisher, again, they have deadlines because they want to make sure that work gets turned in on time. I mean, there's a whole assembly line for these comics. I've known this from working on my projects like Esteem No Good Deed and John Haynes at Death's Door. Again, when you're working on comics, you have to be a part of a team. And again, part of the team is that each team member does their part, and everybody has to have their work turned in at a certain time so that people can go out here and do the next part of the process and getting the book done. So an artist would have, again, the writer has to be the first one to turn in their script, because the writer has to turn in the script usually 90 to 180 days so that the artist can get the script and start working on the script for that book. And as the artist is working on the work, then we have to have time for the letterer to come in. Once the art comes in, the letterer and the colorist to do their jobs. Usually, after the writer does the script, the artist does the line art and the inks, and then I have to turn it over to the colorist, and then I have to turn it over to the letterer. I mean, there's people in the process. And again, this is why things have to be turned in on deadlines so that books can come out on time. In order for a book to come out at a certain date, you need deadlines. And many comic pros don't think that you need deadlines, but you need deadlines so that we can have a structure so that books can come out on schedule. And as books are coming out on schedule, we need a structure so that they can come out on time, so that the customer can get the books on time. Moreover, we need a structure for getting people paid and a structure for getting people paid, because one of the things that I do over here at SJS Direct is I work out the logistics for budgeting, and again, work out that logistics for budgeting so that when I'm working on a book, again, artists are paid on time and paid in full. I mean, every artist that I work with usually gets their money, and again, they're not sitting there waiting for somebody to pay them, like I've seen with many comic companies where people are saying they never got paid. No, you're gonna get paid. And I that's one of the things that I have as a standard, is that we don't do a project over here at SJS Direct unless I have the money ready. Usually when I'm contacting the artist, I've already got the money ready. So you're gonna get paid for your labor. And the whole thing is, if you want to continue getting jobs at SJS Direct, you have to go out here and not only turn in your work on time, but you have to make sure that your work is consistent. Because again, I have standards for my art here at SJS Direct. I'm looking for a certain style of line art. This is something I want artists to know. Again, and the same thing would be at Marvel and DC. We're going to have a consistent standard for the art. And again, not going to go out here and have all sorts of inconsistent art styles. It's all going to be consistent because I want to establish brand recognition. I want to establish character recognition as related to the customer. So as part of the relationship for the customer, I want to establish a whole situation with the brand as related to easy character recognition. So all the art is going to be, again, part of that house style of being consistent. And again, we're not going to see one style of art on one book and another style in another. No, all the art is going to be consistent, and all of it is going to meet a standard, because again, I'm looking to, again, build that relationship with the customer, and I'm looking to build that relationship all around. Now, in addition to, again, establishing a standard for the art, again, I'm establishing a standard for the writing, and establishing a standard for the writing where the writing is going to, again, be family friendly, and again, make it where these stories are going to be all ages accessible. And I want to establish a standard that I do here at SJS Direct that I learned from Jim Shooter, that we're going to have all the stories be their own entry point. And again, every story is going to be an entry point because the new reader, it needs to be able to access the books. And from my experience using Shooter's approach, I have been able to get new readers in outside of the comic book industry and get them to pick up Isis, Esteem, and John Haynes series books with books later in the series. I mean, I've had people come in and pick up books later in each of these series and then come back for the entire run. And part of that plan, again, is to make sure that readers can go out here and pick up the latest book, and the latest book being one that they can pick up and then move forward with the series or move back to the back books. The whole goal is to, again, get people to pick up the front list title and then pick up the back list books, or pick up the more recent titles, and not be confused as related to continuity. And people aren't confused as related to continuity with SJS Direct books, because every book in and of itself is its own story with its own beginning, middle, and end. And that's going to be the standard over at Marvel and DC if I'm in charge. every story is going to have its own beginning, middle, and end. And you may have story arcs that may go 2, 3 issues, but it's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I want to establish a writer's workshop where I teach people the standard for storytelling, where again, I'm going to have people picking up books like Sid Field's screenplay and Robert McKee's story, and again, going to teach them the techniques of writing that I have learned, and again, teach them the techniques in order to be able to tell stories, again, in a fashion where you can go out here and create a story with the fewest economy of words that creates the biggest pictures. And that's how I have been telling stories for years, and I want to establish that as part of the training as related to writing and art. And again, the foundation that I'm going to establish in addition to those standards is that story comes first. Again, story is going to come first. And as we do stories, they're going to be stories built organically on a foundation of organic storytelling. So if I go work at Marvel or DC as their editor-in-chief, my plan is no more of these gimmick stories that we got back in the late 80s and the 90s, and I want to end the overall event model that basically where they have these big events where all the heroes come together to take on some giant menace, because both of those models basically are the thing that I believe tanked the comic book industry, and tanked the comic book industry because many creators basically wound up again being tied, having them hands tied by these events and by these gimmick stories, which basically are what happens when a writer runs out of ideas. They start throwing gimmicks or crap at the wall. But what I want to do is go back to organic storytelling and have events happen in characters' books, like milestones that show how a story arc basically concludes as related to an overreaching arc. So that's something I do over here at SJS Direct, where I have the ISIS series that has gone through 3 story arcs of overreaching arcs. The first story arc started with Amari's revenge, and over the course of that story arc, we see how Isis reestablishes herself as related to being in the world, and goes from being the teacher to the student. And as she goes from being the teacher to the student, we see her transforming as related to her approach to life in the 21st century, and how it's different from the 20th, where she was the teacher, but now she is the student, learning about life and learning about people. And that's the kind of storytelling I want to do as related to the characters, show these characters changing and growing over the course of these story arcs that may go anywhere in an overreaching arc, anywhere from, I believe, 9 to about 12 issues. That's something that I do over here at SJS Direct. And I did this with characters like Isis. I did this with the Esteemed character who started out with no good deed, but the first story arc ended with Ascension. It started with her starting out as a devilish diva, and then eventually she stopped being a demon as she grew as a character. And again, that's what I want to do again, and I believe that'll make the books a bit more collectible, because as you see the characters change and grow, and as their storyline is wind up wrapping up with the overreaching arc, you know where the story ends, and that also makes it where you can make these books more marketable as trade paperbacks, because once you know where the story ends as related to a story arc, you can compact that into either a trade or an omnibus, and that allows you to see, okay, this is where this character's story started and where it ended as related to one arc, as related to overreaching arc. But in that overreaching arc, you will have individual stories that have beginnings, middle, and end. And the beginning, middle, and end of those stories, again, will be easy to follow, whether you pick up one book in the middle or one book towards the end or in the beginning. It'll be easy to follow, and it'll make books easy to work with. And again, this is the model I use here at SJS Direct, which I learned from Jim Shooter and many other comic professionals, and also learned from the overall business of screenwriting. And that's the type of further structure I'm going to build as related to from going from standards to story all around, and going from the standards of standards to structuring the stories. This is where I'm going to have to do the hardest work. And the hardest work that I would do as related to after establishing standards is basically doing something about the jumbled mess of a continuity. And now, when it comes to both Marvel and DC Comics, the continuity is a complete mess. And it's a complete mess because we've had decades of inexperienced people working at both companies, basically destroying these characters because many of these people did not have publishing experience to understand how these stories work together as related to continuity. And as these writers came in and basically didn't know what they were doing, they wound up doing damage to these characters that is very hard to repair. I mean, for example, back in the 1990s, we had the Clone Saga, which did damage to Spider-Man, and that storyline did damage. And again, Editorial didn't stop it because they thought, oh, we can just work our way through it. No, and the only way you can stop a bad story is to not publish it at all. And in the case of Spider-Man, it just took Howard Mackey basically destroyed Spider-Man overall, destroyed his entire paradigm and his entire story model. And that story model got progressively worse after the Clone Saga continued, and even got even worse with stories like One More Day, where Spider-Man makes a compromise with Mephisto and makes that compromise with him to basically not be married to Mary Jane, which throws off the entire continuity of Spider-Man books. And the same thing happened to Iron Man, where we had the crossing where he was the pawn of Kang. That whole situation was they tried to fix it with a Franklin ex machina with Heroes Reborn, but it just didn't flow organically. And again, didn't flow because again, Marvel's Editorial hopped up on Marvel being its own corporate brand and hopped up on Power, basically again created damage to the overall continuity. And these things are just, they were at the point these days are nigh impossible to repair, and nigh impossible to repair because the continuity again is a complete mess at Marvel. Characters don't act like themselves because most people don't even know who these characters are because they've hired so many inexperienced writers and they don't have an editor to give people guidance. And that's something I would want to do and something I would have wanted to do over at Marvel. Same thing over at DC. They hired Dan Didio, again a Hollywood guy, thinking that he could go out here and work in publishing, but the damage he did to DC's continuity, starting with Graduation Day, followed up with Identity Crisis, where he compromised the ethics of DC's characters, who are paragons. The damage that he did destroyed the overall structure of DC Comics, and then he further compounded this by adding more crises, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, then Flashpoint, where we brought Barry Allen back, which was again a cardinal sin. And again, when I look at comics, the entire continuity reminds me of a picture I saw of a 1972 Nova that was completely destroyed. And again, this continuity is so damaged and so broken beyond repair. This is where I would have to, again, do the nuclear option of a complete reset at both companies if I want to establish my standards. And the only way I can turn this around is as related to as implementing my standards is to reset everything. And again, reset everything by, again, setting up things for a series finale on every Marvel or DC book, put a close to all of those books once and for all, and the entire continuity of those Marvel and DC universes, and start new in the 21st century with a brand new universe with characters in their classic costumes, a new continuity, again, in order to maintain those standards, and maintain those standards because you cannot build on a broken foundation. And when it comes to Marvel and DC, the foundation is so broken that it cannot be repaired. No, the foundation of Marvel and DC are so broken that you just basically have to demolish both structures that were established in the 1960s as related to Marvel and DC established back in the Silver Age. There's no fixing that continuity at this point. It's just so damaged and so destroyed by endless reboots, endless relaunches, and it's all because there's no editorial vision. And without that editorial vision, it doesn't matter how much you reboot or relaunch, because if there are no standards in place, to structure everything, you're not going to be able to build anything. That's what many people in the comic book business don't understand, and that's why the industry is in the dire place that it's in right now, where characters like Spider-Man, who once sold 1 million copies, and characters like the X-Men that sold 1 million copies, cannot even sell 10,000 copies today, or characters like Batman over at DC can't sell 10,000 copies today, or characters that became popular due to the MCU, like Iron Man, could not capitalize on that wave of new customers, because the editorial at Marvel and DC Comics, there is no leadership, there is no passion for comics, there is no standard. And again, this is one of the reasons why I'm saying that this is what I would have done back when I was passionate about comics. But when I look at what the overall industry has become, there's not much that I could do to turn both of these companies around. No, there's not much that I can do these days to turn either of these companies around, because these companies are basically broken, and both of these companies are broken because the people who work there, again, did not understand their role in the publishing business like the way people in the Hollywood understand their role. I mean, screenwriters understand their job is to write, actors know that their job is to act, directors know their job is to direct. But when in the comic book business, we had John Byrne basically, again, undermine Jim Shooter's authority, and that in and of itself is one of the reasons why I wouldn't want to work at these days in comics, and I don't want to be bothered with comics anymore, is because John Byrne basically showed how little respect he had for the authority of Jim Shooter, a man who basically, again, worked at the side of one of the master craftsmen, Mort Weisinger, learned the business from Mort Weisinger, and had Marvel basically running like a machine, only to have John Byrne throw the monkey wrench into the entire Marvel machine, derailing the Marvel machine and putting the entire industry into decline. And I know that I would not receive the respect that I need in order to work in comics. No, as a black man, I know that I would have a lot harder time dealing with many of the talent who want to go their own way, not seeing how their attitudes are basically doing damage to the business. A lot of people back in the 80s and the 90s, they basically wanted to do things their own way. And again, because they didn't understand that in the publishing business, the editor is the boss. I mean, when I look at companies like the New York Times, or you look at Vogue, which is run by Anna Wintour, the editor-in-chief is respected, and respected because when the editor-in-chief tells you, okay, a project isn't going a certain way, people respect that person, but you can't get that respect in the comic book industry. And that's one of the reasons why I had to just say I put a period at the end of things as related to my dreams of working in comics, because again, as I've heard many people like Jack Kirby say, comics will break your heart, and it'll break your heart because a lot of people in the business have no respect for leadership. They have no respect for who came before them. They have no respect for fellow creators. No, there's a lot of backstabbing and infighting in the comic book business, and that's why Marvel and DC can't be turned around. No, Marvel and DC can't be turned around because there's no respect for the people who established what we had, or respect for the people who came before them, or respect for people in authority positions. No, there's no respect for people in this business, and that's why a lot of people who have really good talent, like myself, want nothing to do with comics, and we want to move on to areas like trade publishing, because at least in trade publishing or independent trade publishing now, you can get your respect. I mean, I get more respect for writing a book like The Man Crisis or Stop Simpin', nonfiction that helps men, than I possibly would have gotten on a run of comics. And it's harder to even get the funds raised for a Kickstarter. I wanted to do an ISIS graphic novel for years, but I wasn't able to do it. And even when I did the John Haynes at Death Store comic, it came up a little short. But the whole thing is that when it comes to comics, again, comics doesn't respect its talent. And again, I would want to come in and give people respect, but again, this business doesn't respect people. And that's one of the reasons why when I look at Marvel and DC, again, it could have been turned around. And I say it could have been turned around, again, years ago. But unfortunately today, the structure is so damaged. And again, many comic fans don't want to do the work of, again, raising these overall structures of the Silver and Bronze Age comic book industry. I mean, this whole structure has been damaged by years of inexperienced people. You have to clear everything away if you want to build something better. But many people would rather just sit there in the ruins of the comic book industry, where the median age of a customer is 50 years old and getting older. And again, the comic book industry at this point, again, I could come up and implement plans, but the whole thing is, what customer am I going to reach? Critical question that I'm going to ask the viewer. There's no customer for me to reach or build a relationship with. I mean, anybody who is in comics today, they're basically working with manga. And again, manga's median age is anywhere from 7 to 13 years old. Moreover, manga reaches more readers because manga basically, again, is books that are all for anyone. I mean, you've got romance, you've got action and adventure, you've got comedy. And again, with comics, you cannot do those different things. I mean, even in books like I do, like the Esteem series, and ISIS series, I put a lot of comedy in those stories, and some jiggle comedy at that, and cheesecake comedy. And today's superhero fans, again, they are so rigid that they cannot even enjoy moments of, again, humor or in the middle of their action and adventure, and they can't enjoy, again, family-friendly stuff, again, because a lot of people push back on, oh, he's making it family-friendly. Again, I want to make books for everyone, but you can't make books for everyone in the comic book business. I mean, the customers are basically set in their ways and not open to anything new. They're not open to anything new, so as much as I would present my whole plans for Marvel and DC, if I became editor-in-chief, and even though I have the experience to go out here and produce that type of work, it's just not going to work these days because, again, the overall business is basically about to go out. Again, Diamond Comics basically went and filed bankruptcy, again, killing most of the small presses. And then we have under 300 comic stores in the United States. So I would, as much as I'd love to, again, be an editor-in-chief at Marvel or DC, at this point, the comic book industry is at a point of no return. And what's really sad is that I wish that I could have had that opportunity to basically show people what I could have offered them in the business. But sadly, that's just going to be something that I'm going to have to imagine as related to things, because you can't help a business where people don't want to help themselves. And that's one of the big problems with the comic book industry that I've seen from many of the creators online and the indie creators. Many people don't want to help themselves. And again, you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves, whether it be the comic fans, the older comic fans, the people in creative who have one way of making things, or the editorial that's completely inexperienced and just mind-bogglingly baffled all around. You can't help anybody, and this sadly is the culture of the comic book industry that makes it its own worst enemy. People don't want to help themselves, so you can't help someone who wants to help themselves. As much as I'd like to have an impact on this business, you can't have an impact on people who don't want to see what you have to offer them, and that's the whole sad state of affairs that makes it where you just can't turn anything around in this business. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com in paperback, and you can pick up a paper copy for yourself for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And my digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for just 99 cents. And you can pick up a copy of Esteem No Good Deed also in paperback in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And you can check out how I would do comics by checking out those two comics. And you can check out how I would do stories in a universe continuity with the SJS Direct universe by picking up books in the ISIS series, books in the Esteem series, books in the John Haynes series, books in the Spinsterella trilogy, Books in the black sorority novels like The Thetis and my vampire novel Eternal Night and my business novel Recipe for Success. You can find all those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com by clicking the links in the description box. And this was a video requested by a viewer, and if you want to request a video, you can drop a donation of a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.